Good evening. This upcoming week is Parshas Vayeshev, and also Thursday night we light the first candle of the menorah. I want to say to you that the Ramban is replete in Parshas Baloscha with the concept of the Or HaGonos, the hidden light. What does he mean by that reference? We know that in Bereshis, that everything that was created, it says, Vayomer Elokim, such and such, Vayehi Chen. And it was so. But there's one exception. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, Vayehi Or. It doesn't say Vayehi Chen. So the Zohar HaKodesh asks, why doesn't it say Vayehi Chen? It says Vayehi Or. And the Zohar HaKodesh answers and says, Mishum delo hava chen. Because it wasn't so. Everything else that was created remained intact ad hayom hazeh, except for the light. After Adam HaRishon did the Aveira of eating from the Eitz Hadas, the light changed, and it became an inferior light. The Baal Shem Tov said that light, the original light, was taken away. And a person learns Torah Lishma, that the tremendous nachas ruach that he's causing HaKadosh Baruch Hu causes him to feel good. There's an inner glow of spirituality. And the Baal Shem Tov says he's being nena, he's enjoying the Or HaGonus, that original light, because it's Torah Or. But many hold that it's going to be in a treasure chest until Mashiach comes, and that's when suddenly the light that we think is light outside in the world, it'll go off and the real original light of the world will come. Now, when Aaron HaKohen lit the first menorah in the Mishkan, it says, Vayas Kain Aharon in Parshas Ba'aloscha. And the Mekubalim point out that Vayas Kain, Aaron brought back the Vayehi Chen, the Chen that was missing in Parshas Bereshis. He brought it back, and in his menorah, in the flame, kindled the Or HaGonos. Because Aaron HaKohen was not maskim that Klal Yisrael, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, should have to wait until Mashiach to enjoy the Or HaGonus. That's why in Shulchan Aruch, the halacha is that when a person lights Chanukah Lecht, he has to sit there and stare at the flame, at the ner. Some opinions are 20 minutes, some opinions are a half an hour. But why? Because Shabbos candles, the women don't have to sit there and stare at it. Many women sit and say different tchinas and different bakoshas and different tfilos, but it's not that they have to do it al pi halacha. And al pi halacha by Chanukah, you can't just light and walk away. So the answer is because since Aaron HaKohen worked out that there should be this kindling of the Or HaGonus in the flame, that we have to, like a blotter, like an ink blotter, absorb. And we have to drench our neshamas and our moiches with the kedusha of that Or HaGonus. And by staring and looking at the candle, that's how we have it become part and parcel of our ruchnias. So the Ramban, what I just told you in the Bnei Yissaschar Ba'arichas, discussed this inyan. Now, Chanukah happened around 260 years after the story of Purim. So the last Yom Tov, a Klal Yisrael Yom Tov, that we say Hallel all 8 days, and we make a bracha on Hallel b'Shem u'Malchus, and we don't leave anything out. We say the whole Hallel all 8 days. Because the level of Chanukah was the kavanah of Yaakov Avinu to carry Klal Yisrael through the dark days of Golus. We know, says the Bnei Yissaschar, and he quotes Tikkunim to marshal support to that point of view, that Yaakov Avinu's yortzeit is the first day of Sukkot. And the pasuk says when he was nifter, that Klal Yisrael had avelos for 70 days. Now, in halacha, we don't have any inyan of 70 days. We have Shiva, we have Shloishim, and we have Shana. For a mother or a father, lo aleinu, lo aleichem, if you lose them, you have to be in a state of avelos for the entire year. A brother, a sister, chas v'sholom, a child, is 30 days. So why was there a period of 70 days when Yaakov Avinu passed on? And the Bnei Yissaschar explains, because if you go from the first day of Sukkot, when Yaakov was nifter, for 70 days, you land on the first day of Chanukah. The 15th day of Tishrei is Sukkot. You go 30 days later is the 15th day of Cheshvan. 30 days later is the 15th day of Kislev. That's 60. And then 10 days later, from the 15th of Kislev to the 25th of Kislev is Chanukah. And the reason for it is that Yaakov Avinu, when he was nifter, Bikesh Yaakov Lagalos Esaketz, he wanted to bring the Geula Shlema right then and there. No Golos. But Min HaShemayim, they took away from him his Ruach HaKodesh at that moment, and he couldn't do that. So he at least wanted to have a kesher with Chanukah from his Petir, the 70 days, so that he could influence the power of Chanukah to carry Klal Yisrael for the over 2,000 years of Golus, that they will endure all of the captivity, they will endure all of the scapegoating, and they will endure all of the expulsions that will happen to Klal Yisrael. And that's why the end of his mourning, that they mourned for him, was on the first day of Chanukah. Now, and it was like valises, that when a person goes on a trip, if he goes for a week, he may take 1 or 2 suitcases. But if he goes for 6 months, he may take 10 suitcases. The power of Chanukah had to be the backbone and the cementing factor for Klal Yisrael to survive all the days of Golus. And that's why Yaakov Avinu is Keneged Myriad, because Myriad is at the nighttime, Golus, and Avram and Yitzchak, Avram is Shachris, and Yitzchak Avinu is Mincha, daytime. Vayizrach lo hashemesh. And that's why it says lo, Vayizrach lo. And the Zohar Kodesh asks, lo, what do you mean, the sun shine just for him? And the Zohar ends, because it shines for the whole world. But what it means is that that inner glow of Yaakov Avinu and his koyach in the darkness of myriad, which represents Golus, it's going to glow for him, and that's why the pasuk says Vayizrach lo Hashemesh, and not Vayizrach lohem, to the whole world, the Shemesh. Now, Chanukah we have 8 days. There is no other Yom Tiv that we celebrate for 8 days. That means Pesach in Eretz Yisrael is 7 days. Sukkot is also 7 days. And the 8th day, which is a regal b'fnei atzma, is Shmini Atzeres. In Eretz Yisrael, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah together. But to have equilibrium for all the 8 days, because the 8th day is because of Chutzalor, it's that we have an 8th day. But it's not equal to the Shivas Yomim of Sukkot or of Pesach. But Chanukah supersedes, even though it's a D'Rabbanan, and Pesach and Sukkot are both D'Oraisa, but Chanukah has equal 8 days. And we know that 8 represents Lamala Minateva, because if someone asks you, how many days are there in the week? You would answer them 7. And when you ask them then, and what's the 8th day of the week? You'd answer and say, there is no 8th day. 8 is already Shemayim, Lamala Minateva. And that's the power of Chanukah, that it's the embodiment of 8. The koya, the shmini, lamala minateva, olam haba. I don't mean specifically olam haba, I mean that world, because Yemos HaMashiach is 7, and the Kiner of David is 8, which is Keneged Tchias HaMesim, and then 10 is the world reverts to what Adam and Chava had, Gan Eden, which is higher than even the Madrega of Tchias HaMesim. It's like what happens after Tchias HaMesim, and that is the power of Olam Haba. But in any event, it was implanted, it was instilled, it was inculcated into Chanukah to be able to carry Klal Yisrael through 2,000 years of Golus, and to remain Yidden, to remain Maminim B'nei Maminim, and to be able to flourish as a Klal Yisrael, hanging on to the koyach of Chanukah. And that's why, even though the Medrash more commonly known is that Purim is above, so high that even after Mashiach comes, it won't change its format. Yom Kippur, Pesach, they will all change their format. That means it says all of the Yomim Tovim will be bottled, but not Purim. Because Purim is the Olam HaKeser, and Keser is above everything, even above Atzilus. And it can't be affected by before Mashiach or after Mashiach. It's too high up. But there are Medrashim that say Chanukah enjoys that same status and will not be Batal li Olam Voed when Mashiach comes and the world begins to revert back. Now, we know that the Chashmonoim were victorious. And if you look at Rashi and Zos HaBracha, on the words Umisanov Min Yekumun, there are 2 pshatim that Rashi brings in Zos HaBracha on that pasuk. The second one, he says that it's a reference to the Chashmonoim in the second Bais Hamikdash, who were victorious, and Rashi says it was Yud Beis Chashmonoi, there were 12, and Elazar Ubeno. That was the whole army of Klal Yisrael. And Rashi says, Keneged Kama Rivavos. That means there were many tens of Elif is 1,000. Revava is 10,000. And Rashi says, Kama Revavos, which means there could have been 60,000. And here was Elazar Beno, the 11, 12, 13 together, and that was it. Nothing else. And that was why it was such a miracle that they won. But unfortunately, after they won, they remained in the position as kings. And it was a criticism, and Nebuch, they all died out. What do we learn from this? Here they were riding high, and they were Kedoshim, but they made a mistake, and they thought that they could maintain the Malchus. Now we know Malchus is only Yehuda. No one else comes from there. But they remained, and unfortunately they paid a very big price. Now, many times when we know someone who is a Baal Chesed or a Talmud Chacham, and we hear something about him that diminishes the reverence and the respect that we have for that person. First of all, before you even, it's Lashon Hara, it could be Moitzi Shemra, but once we hear that, it dilutes and dissolves all of the very good impression that we had of him. He could have been a wonderful person for 50 years, and then we're here, he did something. First of all, we're not the Rabbanan Shalom to sit and judge people, but it dissolves the past and we remain with that last impression. But we learn from the Chashmonoim the fact that we have to lahodosu lahalel, the whole Chanukah in celebration of the Nes and the win of the Chashmonoim, that we don't wash away, even if at the end they made a mistake and they held on to Klal Yisrael as Malachim, as kings, which was wrong, and Nebuch, they died because of it. But we don't wipe out the beginning and only remember that fact. And that's an important lesson to us in how we in a society, a community, a shul, a shtibel, wherever we are, and something happens with someone, not to forget and push aside a lifetime of enviable reputation because of something that may have happened towards the end of his life or towards the latter years in his life. And that's why Yaakov Avinu went back to the Pachim Ketanim, to the little jugs, because one of those jugs was the oil that they found in the Beis HaMikdash in the story of Chanukah. One of them, and it had Yaakov Avinu and Yitzchak and Avram had a halacha of a Kohen Gadol, or they couldn't have gone onto the Har Bayis and slept there and all of that. So Yaakov Avinu signed as Kohen Gadol. And that's what they found that kept them going until they had a fresh supply of oil. Now, we know that our parsha begins, Parshas Vayeshev, with the fact that the brothers were jealous of Yosef. Now we have to realize and never forget The Shivtei, the 12 tribes, were Kodesh Kadoshim. They were so big that when they sold Yosef, and the halacha is if you kidnap a person, it's a lav. If you kidnap a person and sell him, it's misa. A person is given the death penalty for selling. And that's why, as I've said to you before Yom Kippur, that the reason that we wear gym shoes and not leather shoes on Yom Kippur has nothing to do with Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning and avelas. Yom Kippur is a Yom Tiv. It's Yom Tiv. If someone's sitting Shiva and Yom Kippur comes in, it's mevatel the whole Shiva, because Yom Tiv can be mevatel the Shiva. So why don't we wear shoes for the last 4,000 years on Yom Kippur? As a kapara, because when the brothers sold Yosef, they got esrim kesef, 20 silver coins, as the pasuk says, and they bought shoes. And those shoes, we, every Yom Kippur, are working towards a kapara, an atonement for those shoes that the brothers bought. But the pasuk says, so it says if they had to die, why weren't they killed? So the Zohar HaKadosh says that there was no malach, no saraf, no oifan, and no chayas HaKodesh that could effectuate a punishment into the Shivtei Kah, because the Shivtei Kah were so big that they couldn't come near them to do anything to them. When did they die? The neshamas went into the Tanoim, and the Asara Haruge Malchus were neshamas of Tanoim. And Reuven wasn't there by the selling. He went back home for Kibbutz Av. So he was the neshama in Reb Elazar Reb Hyrcanus, who walked around the street and the Romans didn't touch him. They didn't touch him, they didn't arrest him, they didn't kill him. And he never was in hiding, like all of the others who they wanted to kill. So why was that? His neshama Reuven, because he wasn't there by the mechira of Yosef. He went back to his father's house. And the Arizal discusses this also ba'arichas. Now, when we talk about jealousy, we have to realize how big the brothers were, and they felt la halacha that Yosef was trying to kill them. He kept bringing back stories to his father about them, and they thought that his goal was to kill them. And they had a din of a rodef, a person chasing someone to kill them, that they had the right to kill. And as a bezin, they paskened up and said what they felt. So, for that one nekuda of the jealousy, and we can't debate because the pasuk says it, the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are 100% absolute truth, not 99%. So if it's 100%, the pasuk says Vayikanu vo echov, that the brothers were jealous of him. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, who was one of those special Tanoim who are buried in Tveria in that little cemetery, and he was the biggest of the big, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, and his Talmidim came in when he was sick and he was dying. So his Talmidim saw he was crying. So they said to him that, how could that be? You are the Amud Hayamini Patish HaChazak. You are the greatest of the great. So why are you, as you're being nifter, why are you crying? So the Gemara says that he answered them and said, if I was going to a judgment in front of a human judge, I would be afraid, and his judgment is only, even if he puts me to death, the death is for a second, then I'm in Olam Haba. So, but here I'm going before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's a judgment which is forever. Why shouldn't I be concerned? But the Meforshim all jump in this Gemara. I mean, who are we kidding? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai was so big, bigger than a malach. What was he crying about? What was he so concerned about? So the Meforshim say very interestingly, you see, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai was nifter, and he lived in his life was the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And there was a very big debate if they should fight the Romans or don't fight. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai with other Tanoim held that you have to go peacefully and you have to deal with the Romans. But there were Bar Yoinim, the Gemara says, youngsters who were very mighty, and they said, what? We don't want to take this sitting down. We're going to fight. And when all the Chacham said, no, you shouldn't fight, so the Gemara says that there was 21 years of storage of food. That means Eretz Yisrael could have lasted, even if there was an embargo. They had in their storage buildings, they had enough food to support and feed Klal Yisrael for 21 years. What did the Bar Yoinim do? They wanted to fight, so they went and the Gemara says they burnt down all the food. So there was no food, so the Klal Yisrael had no choice. They had to go fight the Romans. So it says that when this happened, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai went to the Tsar and he asked him for three things. He asked him to let Yavne v'chachameh, there was a city called Yavne, which still is in Israel, Yavne, and they had a tremendous number. The whole city was big Talmidei Chachamim. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai was bothered, worried that Torah is going to be wiped out if they come in and they destroy everything. So he asked that Yavne be allowed to exist further. And the second thing he asked is that Rabbi Gamliel should not be killed, because he was from the Nesiim, that there was in Klal Yisrael a Nasi, and if you killed him, then it would be an end to the idea and the genealogy and the royalty of Nesius. And he wanted him to remain alive. And the third thing that he asked for was medicine for Reb Tzadok. There was a big tzaddik, Reb Tzadok, who fasted almost his whole life. And he was deathly sick and he needed the medicine, and he asked for the medicine. And it says the Tsar gave him all three. He gave him Yavne, and he gave him Rabbi Gamliel to live, and medicine. So the Meforshim, the Gemara asks, and everybody talks about, why didn't he ask that the Beis HaMikdash should not be destroyed? So some Meforshim say he didn't ask for that because he held it was too much, and he wouldn't have given it to him. The other Meforshim say he forgot. He simply forgot. So when he was being nifter, the day he was dying, he thought that maybe he didn't ask for the Beis HaMikdash because he wanted to prove to the Bar Yoinim, the young, strong youth, that he, Rabbi Yochanan, was right. Because if he asked for the Bais HaMikdash to stay, and it stayed, then the Bar Yoinim would say, you see, The way we handled it is the way you ended up with the Beis HaMikdash remaining. So, a millionth, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, Kodesh, Kedoshim, Tahor, V'Kodosh, had in his own mind a suffix if he's going to be held liable in Shemayim, that maybe there was a machshava that he wanted to prove to the Bar Yonim, so it was his ego that he didn't ask for the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why he was crying. That's what the Mefarshim say. The point being that we could see how far tzaddikim went to make sure that every kavanah was l'shem shamayim. That means when we sit down and learn a Blat Gemara, or we start Shemona Esrei, and when we're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, we're thinking about the meeting that we have to go to, and what we should say at the meeting, what we shouldn't say, like the Rebbe who came over to a merchant in his tzibur and said, Shalom Aleichem. So he said, Rebbe, I didn't go anywhere. So he said, oh no, just now in your Shemona Esrei, you were in Leipzig, and you were here, and you were there, you were worldwide. So now I'm welcoming you back with a Shalom Aleichem. And we have to make sure that our kavanas are pure when we tell off a child, when we make a point of correction or criticism, that there isn't any other cheshbonis in that thing that gives us the right at that moment to criticize and to put down or do whatever we're doing, and that there's something in there that is not 100%. Now, Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, you know, the brothers, when they sold him, they took the ksoinas pasam, they dipped it in the blood, and they brought it back to Yaakov Avinu. And they caused Yaakov Avinu to cry and to mourn for 22 years. So Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman said, how in the world is there a blood libel against Yidden? A blood libel is that before Pesach, for over 1,000 years, in many countries, they would go and kill a goyish child and claim that the Yidden killed him, and they were taking his blood to bake their matzahs with it. And there was a massacre. I mean, the Goyim got up angry, you did that to one of our children. And they would kill 1,000 Yidden, 100 Yidden, whatever number, but there was a massacre. And this went on for the longest time. And the last blood libel was in upstate New York in 1928. So when you think of a blood libel that, yeah, it must have been 800 years ago, 600 years. No, it was just 100 years ago. So Elchanan Wasserman asked, how could they say such a ridiculous thing? In Yiddishkeit, we run from blood. We salt our meat. We soak it in the water. We do it to get every drop of blood out. So Rabbi Elchanan answered, Zechrona Livrocha, that because the brothers took the ksoinas pasam and dipped it in blood to fool Yaakov Avinu, and he cried and lost his Ruach HaKodesh and was ba'atzvus, was despondent for 22 years, that was nisgalgal that Klal Yisrael had to pay with the blood libel, blood keneged blood. And that's how it became a fact, as unbelievable and ridiculous as it is. So said Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman. So we find that in our Sedra, there are two stories. There's Yehuda and Tamar, and there's Yosef and Ashes Potiphar. We also know that in the history of Klal Yisrael, there's a concept of Mashiach, Mashiach ben David, but there's also Mashiach ben Yosef. who everyone, all tzaddikim and everyone with Ruach HaKodesh said the Mashiach ben Yosef already came. Some said it was the Baal Shem Tov, some said it was Reb Shlomo Karliner, because it says one of the conditions of Reb Shlomo of Mashiach ben Yosef is the person has to be murdered. And he was hit with a Cossack's bullet and remained. Reb Shlomo Karliner, who was the second Stoliner Rebbe, stolen Karlin, and he was in a coma for 3 days, and then he died. So, but Mashiach ben David is the one we're waiting for, and every day as Tzemach David Avdocha Meheirus Atzmiach, that we're waiting for Mashiach to come. What does these two stories have to do? Because we see even with Eshes Potiphar that she wanted to seduce Yosef. She said at one point, listen, if you don't want to live with me and be intimate here in Olam Hazeh, I'm asking to Olam Haba. Look at Rashi, Lishkav Etzla, Be'olam Hazeh, Liyos Ima Li'olam Haba. Which means it wasn't just a simple story of some lady trying to seduce a very handsome young man. But she saw, the astrologers told her that the Savior, that the salvation, the Geula, Mashiach, will come out from you. And, but they also told her, either from you or from your household. And the truth is that Yosef Hatzadik, ended up marrying Osnas, who was the daughter born to Dinah after Shechem violated her. And when she came home with the daughter, Yaakov Avinu said, I don't want her in this house. And he put a kameya around her neck that said, Osnas Bas Dina Bas Yaakov. And she ended up Min HaShamayim in Potiphar's house and was brought up like an adopted daughter. And Yosef ended up marrying her. He married his niece. And they had Menashe and Ephraim. So that is the Inyan of Mashiach ben Yosef, and Yehuda and Tamar. Yehuda's first son died, and the second son died, and there was a halacha of Yibum. So Tamar, his daughter-in-law, had to wait to marry the third son, and Yehuda didn't want her to marry him because he was afraid he'll die too, like the first two. So he was pushing off and pushing off. So Tamar saw that from her has to come out Mashiach. So she ambushed him on a thing, and the Medrash says he didn't want to do it. He wanted to run away. But the Medrash says that the Malach like forced him into it, because from that she had two sons, and one of those sons was the progenitor, was the one who from him was going to come out Mashiach ben David. So we see that from Hesach Hadas, because if you asked a group, let's say of people, cite in Chumash stories or something that happened that you think from that it'll contribute to Mashiach coming. One of the last stories you would put, and the answer is Yehuda and Tamar. Or Yosef and Eshes Potiphar. But that's exactly the way Mashiach will come, with Hesach Hadas, and that's why in the further lineage, Rus was the great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech, And if you know a tour guide that knows what he's talking about, when he takes you to the Koisel, he can take you to the place that when David HaMelech started to build the first Bais HaMikdash, his great-great-great-grandmother, Rus, came and gave and put in the first stone. And a tour guide today can show you way down to see the stone that Rus put in as the first stone to building of the first Bais HaMikdash. David HaMelech was told after 6 rows to stop, because anything that David HaMelech would build could never be destroyed. And Min HaShamayim, there was a gezer that the Bais HaMikdash will be destroyed. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told David, listen, you did 6 rows, stop. Let your son Shlomo, let him finish and build the first Bais HaMikdash, and that could be destroyed. But today the 6 rows are still there of David HaMelech that he bought in, because that could never be destroyed. Now, the remez in our story, because we talked about the ending of Mashiach, and that's when the Or Agonos will come back, Tamar said in front of the people she was ready to let herself be killed rather than embarrass Yehuda. But she held up the mate and the psilim and the choisim, the ring. And she said, whoever owns these 3 items was the one that I was with and I'm expecting from. And Yehuda had, and as a matter of fact, that's why Yehuda got Malchus, because a leader can't be embarrassed if you're going to be exposed. Even in front of 1,000 people. Yehuda could have said, when Tamar said that, just kept quiet. And she would have been burnt, and the twins in her would have also died. But no one would have known the difference. But Yehuda had the backbone and the stamina to stand up as a true leader. Has to be able to make a statement and stand by it, and be unequivocal. And that's why he got Malchus. And that brings us to the question that when the brothers grabbed Yosef and they had finished their Bezdin and they wanted to kill him, and they threw him into a pit that had scorpions and snakes, which means an hour later he would have been gone, or 2 hours later. And Yehuda, after they threw him in, said, why in the world did we throw him in? He's our brother. We're going to kill him. And the brothers agreed, and they took him out. Meantime, Reuven wasn't there, so he didn't know this whole story. He thought that Yosef was devoured in that pit when he got back from his kibbutz. And it says that they then saw a caravan of Yishmaelim, and they sold him, and he ended up in Mitzrayim. So the Gemara has a debate. Did Yehuda do the right thing or not? Was it condemnable? Was it bad what he did? Or was it commendable, good, something that you should commend him for? And there's a very big debate, and the Gemara and the Medrash talks about it. So the Meforshim ask, at least he saved his life. He said, let's pull him out of the pit. So, how could you condemn that? So the Meforshim answers and say, for a regular person, you're right. He at least saved his life. But Yehuda was going to become the Melech Yisrael. And why didn't he completely save him? A Melech can't be wishy-washy, half here and half there. Well, okay, he got him out of the pit, but he didn't save him. He didn't know what was going to happen to him when they sold him to this Orchas Yishmaelim. We know that he was pulled out of jail, and he became the second most powerful person in the world, and fed the entire world because of his kedusha. As the Arizal says, that a person can have parnasa and have harchava, but he has to be a Torah v'kodesh, because in the schus of tahara, that's the parnasa. And a person that has tahara is able to be mashpia, and that's why he was mashpia, food for the whole world. He ended up feeding not just Mitzrayim and the Shiftei Kor that came down. Every nation was coming to Mitzrayim to get food, to survive. And he was the mashpia. And the pasuk says, Hu hashalit, hu hamashpia, who he was feeding the entire everyone. So that would have been good for the populace, but not for Yehuda, who was destined for Malchus. No halfway there. Now there are 4 words in our parsha that changed the destiny of history for the world forever. Yosef was thrown into this prison, and he's sitting there in a corner, and he sees at the other side that the royal butler, I mean, these were men of, not just like a cook in the kitchen, this was the royal butler who poured the kos of Paro, and the baker, they were both there. And he walked over to them, the end of our parsha says, and he said to them, Madua penechem ro'im hayom. 4 words. What do you look so dejected? What do you look so unhappy about? So devastated? And they told him that we each had a dream and we're gloomy because it looked like a gloomy dream, but we don't know what it means. So they told him the dream, each one of them, and Yosef said to the butler, you're going to live on. Because he saw that there were, that the birds were not coming near him because he was alive. And the baker, he told, was going to be killed in 3 days because he saw that the birds were coming to his hat, his basket. And birds don't come to live people, they're afraid of it. So he understood that he was going to be killed. And from those 4 words, when he restored the butler to pour his cup of wine, and when the dream of Paro in next week's Sedra in Miketz, by the way, this week that Vayeshev is Shabbos Chanukah, it only happens once every 24 years. Parshas Miketz is always Shabbos Chanukah. Sometimes there's 2 Shabbosos, it's Vayeshev and Miketz. But it's always, except one time every 24 years. And this year, the only Shabbos Chanukah is Vayeshev. There is no Shabbos Chanukah with Miketz. Now, in our Sedra, when Yosef went out to find the brothers, it says, Vayimtso'ehu ish, that he met a man. And Rashi says, who was this man? It was the Malach Gavriel. Now last week, in last week's Sedra, when Yaakov Avinu had the fight with the Sar Shel Esav, the pasuk says also, Ish, Vayevek Ish, Imo. So how does Rashi know to say over here in our Sedra that it's a malach, a wonderful malach? the word Ish. And in last week's Seder on Ish, he said it was Samuel, it was the bad Malach, it was the one to fight him and to... So the Meforshim answer and say that when Gavriel saw him, he said, Ma tevakesh, what are you looking for? A Yid, when he sees a Yid is in need, he comes over, you look a little hungry, can I bring you something to eat? Can I bring you a hot coffee? Can I bring you lunch? Can I bring you dinner? When somebody is struggling to open a door, a Yid runs over to open the door for the person. We don't just look and see misery or helplessness. We right away ma tevakesh. But by the last week, it doesn't say anything like that. He came only to harm him. And if it wouldn't be for the son, he wouldn't have been healed. We don't eat the sciatica. We don't eat the part of the behemoth, the Gid HaNosha, because that's where he was temporarily hurt by the Malach. And Baruch Hashem, he was, but even so, it remained Osir. It's a Nisr that there's Chaylev around there, which is a Nisr chorus. In other words, if somebody, Chas v'Shalom, eats a treif steak, they're over a lav of eating something treif. But if he eats Chaylev, which is inside of a cow, there are parts of the cow that Shochtim know how to cut it out and get rid of it, or they just take that whole piece of the cow and give it to al streif and they sell it to a goy. So the Gid HaNosha with the Chaylev, that's a Chiyuv chorus. So the answer of the Ish and the Ish is when somebody says Ma tevakesh, that a Yid comes over to help another Yid, that we know is the Malach, the good Malach. And when there's only trouble and there's fighting, then we know that there is in the source a bad Malach. So I want to say to you that this week you're coming in Eretz Yisrael. You know there's only two names that have Aleph Lamed at the end, Hashem's name, Kael. Yisrael, the Yidden, and Yishmael. But as the Arizal says that the koyach of every word, every letter, is the nekudos. That's why he says the shoyrish of nekudos is higher than the letters. Because let's say you have a base, but there's no nekuda. If you put a dot under it, it becomes B, and it means to me, B. If you say apatach, ba, that means in, babayis, in the house. So Yisrael has a tseire under the aleph, kael, but Yishmael has no nakuda under the aleph. The last two nakudas are under the ayin. At the end of his name, it's spelled ayin, aleph, lamed. The nakudas are on the ayin, which means the kael, the power of the good, has no effect on Yishmael. And that's why we see the behavior in Eretz Yisrael, how any sane person could see what was done to children and to people being thrown into ovens and fires and what, unbelievable, and then come out, well, we can understand the Palestinian side and come out, and many Yidden Nebuch, that how could they be so merciless and so blinded by what it is? So we hope that the Nes Chanukah will be Nitzachon, because it put in that Maisa Avos Siman Lebanim, that carved out and etched into the essence of Klal Yisrael, that there will always be Nitzachon for Klal Yisrael, starting with the Chashmonoim all the way through Golus until the Geula Shlema. have a Freilich in Shabbos and a Listikin Chanukah.